Well, Lisa, the big issue today is how this jury is going to see the writings that Johar Tsarnaev made inside that boat. The defense has said they want the jury to see the entire boat, even if it means bringing the vessel here to federal court. Prosecutors say for their part they're happy just to cut the panels out of the side of the boat and bring them here. So Judge O'Toole feels the only way he can make the decision is to go visit the boat himself, which he did just a couple of hours ago, after jurors at the very least got to see some photographs of the writings. Johar Tsarnaev wrote this note as he waited for authorities to find him or his body inside this Watertown boat. A short time later, the bullets fired at him and his own blood would cover some of his message, but what's still readable, jurors saw up close today. God has a plan for each person, Tsarnaev wrote in pencil. Mine was to hide in this boat and shed some light on our actions. The note continues to essentially admit the role he and his brother Tamerlan played in the Boston Marathon bombings. We are promised victory, and we will surely get it, he wrote. Now, I don't like killing innocent people, but due to said, and here his writing is obscured by a bullet hole, it is allowed. The boat note is just one of hundreds of pieces of evidence introduced today, boxes upon boxes hauled into court as prosecutors build their case. All of it was once stored here at the city's Black Falcon terminal, which FBI witnesses described became the hub for all bombing evidence.
Now that it's been brought out in testimony, I can talk about it. This was a raw mill space. It wasn't heated. It wasn't, there was electricity in there. That was the only thing.
WBZ security analyst Ed Davis worked out of the Black Falcon terminal when he was the city's police commissioner.
It was really a makeshift laboratory that was put together for processing evidence. It was quite a thing to behold, actually.
Earlier, tensions rose in court as Tsarnaev's lawyer, Miriam Conrad, angrily cross-examined the Boston FBI agent who read from Johar's 2 Twitter accounts. Some social media entries seemed damning until she got the agent to admit some are just Tsarnaev quoting rap lyrics. And if nothing else, today was certainly an emotional break for the men and women of this jury. The past few days of testimony have just been heartbreaking across the board. Today, the prosecution really shifted its focus, gathering a lot more evidence, a lot more database as they build their factual case against this defendant. Lisa?
Jim, before Judge O'Toole makes his decision about the boat, what happens to it?
So it's going to stay in storage right now at an undisclosed location. The judge is going to make this decision probably pretty soon because the prosecution case is actually going well ahead of schedule. They're making fast progress, so the judge has to make this decision about what to do with this boat. They'll either take it out of storage and bring it here, bring the jurors to the boat, or possibly just take the panels out. But again, that's a decision that he's going to have to make in the very near future.
All right, Jim Armstrong, live at the federal courthouse tonight. Thank you, Jim.
And a developing story now. Good evening to you. I'm David Wade.
I'm Lisa Hughes. That carjacking victim took the stand telling the jury how he got away. Jim Armstrong is live at the federal courthouse in South Boston tonight. And Jim, jurors hung on his every word.
Literally, Lisa, at the edge of their seat, mouth open, listening to what Dun Meng had to say. His testimony was at the same time fascinating and terrifying. He says for a while he and Tamerlan were alone in his SUV, and Tamerlan has this long conversation with Meng. At one point he asks him, "Do you think all white people look alike? Do you think you will be able to recognize me if I drop you off somewhere and let you live?" Meng says he realized immediately it was in his best interest to lie, and he told Tamerlan, "Absolutely, I will forget who you are as soon as you let me go, if you let me live." This jury was captivated today by the riveting testimony of the young man carjacked by the Tsarnaev brothers the night of April 18th. Dun Meng explained how he was out for a drive to clear his mind when Tamerlan Tsarnaev jumped in his car and put a gun to his head, announcing he was the Boston Marathon bomber and he just killed a cop in Cambridge, his brother Johar in the car behind them. Meng told jurors he was, quote, terrified. The whole world, everybody, is looking for them at that time, he said, and there they were in his Mercedes SUV. Meng says Tamerlan decided to drive, and Johar eventually got in the back seat, asking only if the car had a way to play his music from his iPhone. Meng says Johar next asked for his ATM card and PIN code. Surveillance images show Tsarnaev taking out $800 in cash and trying for another $800, but getting denied. As the trio drive, Meng's cell phone rings. It's his roommate, and Tamerlan takes over. Quote, he took the gun and pointed it to me and said, you have to answer the phone, but if you say any single word in Chinese, I will kill you right now. Meng identified Johar in court, later explaining how he ran for his life when they got to this Memorial Drive Shell station, dashing into the mobile next door. "I was thinking maybe this is chance for me to run," he said, because they told me they both have guns. Earlier in the day, investigators explained how they tracked down the brothers' green Honda Civic that was used as a getaway car following the murder of Officer Sean Collier. Meng was clearly terrified during that carjacking experience, but he also made some absolutely brilliant decisions. In the midst of driving around, the Tsarnaev brothers say to him, "Do you have a GPS in this car? We're trying to get to New York." Of course, he did have a GPS, but Meng realized it was in his interest to lie to them. He said, "We have no GPS here." Later, when he escapes and is talking to Cambridge police, he says, "Not only do I have a GPS, I have a special Mercedes tracking system. I'm going to give you the PIN code for it. You can use it with Mercedes to find my car, pinpoint exactly where it is." And that, David, is how they found it just moments later on Dexter Street in Watertown.
Just absolutely incredible to listen to, and to think how he got out of the car and was able to run away. After that, Jim, we saw this new piece of video. We just got it in a couple of minutes ago of him inside this gas station. This is it here. What did he say about what happens here as he tries to describe what's happening to the clerk?
He runs into the mobile and he's got broken English and he's extremely nervous. He's scared. He's trying to explain to the clerk that his life is in danger. And the clerk is really asking him to leave, saying, "You can't be here right now." The video shows him quite literally get down on his hands and knees, put his hands together in prayer. He told the jury today he was saying to him, "Please, please, please call 911. He gets on his hands and knees and crawls behind the clerk, just looking for somewhere to hide. The clerk, of course, has no idea what's happening at this point. He wants the guy to leave. He says, "You can't be back here. This is private property. You can't be here." Again, Meng just keeps pleading with him, "Please call 911. The clerk eventually does call 911, and in the call we heard in court today, he tells police, "I have this guy in my convenience store who won't go." The clerk, for a while, misunderstanding all of what was going on. It only becomes clear to him a few moments later when police do arrive, and Meng tells them, "I was just in the car with the two guys who say they are the Boston Marathon bombers."
Incredible, and as he's holding onto that door, you can tell he's not sure if they're coming back to get him. Jim Armstrong, incredible reporting today. Thank you so much.
And seeing in photos what Boston Marathon bomber Tamerlan Tsarnaev did the night before the attacks at the finish line. Jim Armstrong is live at the federal courthouse in South Boston. Jim, there's been so much evidence, but these pictures came from a rather unexpected place.
Or, Lisa, as a matter of fact, you could make the argument that these pictures would actually hurt the prosecution's case against Johar Tsarnaev, so they're not the ones who released them. They came during cross-examination from Johar's own defense team, pictures of their client's big brother. These new images show Tamerlan Tsarnaev leaving the target in Watertown, carrying two newly purchased backpacks the day before the marathon bombings. Jurors even saw a copy of his receipt. Remnants of one backpack, prosecutors say, were found on Boylston Street, the other on Laurel Street in Watertown after the police shootout. Still another backpack for jurors to consider, this one that took days of digging in the Crapo landfill to find. Today, jurors learned how that happened. Inside the backpack, a thumb drive, UMass Dartmouth paperwork, and fireworks. All of it, the jury heard, stuffed into the backpack and thrown into a dumpster by Johar Tsarnaev's friends in an attempt to protect him. More than 100 pieces of evidence, jurors were told, were seized from the Tsarnaev home in Cambridge, and much was made again of the two flags in Johar Tsarnaev's bedroom bearing the Shahada, or Muslim profession of faith. The defense suggests that it wasn't Johar's room as much as it was a computer or storage room in an apartment, the defense asserts, really belonged to Tamerlan, his wife and baby daughter. The rest of today straight out of a detective movie. An FBI investigator testified how they figured out the type of pressure cooker left at the finish line and thrown at police in Watertown was a Fager brand pressure cooker sold exclusively at Macy's. And before long, jurors heard the FBI had the records for every single such pressure cooker sold in the Northeast and then sold in Massachusetts. Only 5 were bought in cash. That was step 1. Next, FBI analysts took data from the Tsarnaev brothers' portable GPS units, figured out everywhere they drove in the weeks and months leading up to the bombings. And sure enough, the data shows the brothers' GPS unit was at the Square One Mall in Saugus at the exact times when the pressure cookers were purchased. That GPS evidence and the path it traced is remarkable, but prosecutors pointed out in court today it does have some holes in it. There's no way to tell who was driving the car, who was a passenger in the car, if anyone, and there's certainly no way to tell who, if anyone, got out of the car and made those purchases in that Macy's. Nevertheless, this jury is left with a mountain now of circumstantial evidence as well to consider. Live outside federal court, Jim Armstrong, WBZ News. David, Lisa, back to you.
All right, Jim, thank you. Tonight, it is attention-grabbing news. This is to the stand.
The prosecution ending strong today with evidence that brought jurors to tears. Our Jim Armstrong is live outside the federal courthouse tonight. Jim, we know the jury could have this case by the end of the week.
Yeah, Paula, that's absolutely correct. Things are certainly moving fast at this point. The speed with which they'll move forward really right now depends entirely on Johar Tsarnaev's defense team and the length of the defense they plan to mount on their client's behalf. They did get right to work this afternoon after what was a very tearful morning here in courtroom 9. Several members of this jury spent the morning holding back tears, others openly crying as the prosecution wrapped up its case against Johar Tsarnaev, the doctor who performed the autopsy on 8-year-old Martin Richard, showing jurors the blood-soaked, torn, and burned clothes that the little boy was wearing on Marathon Monday. 2 T-shirts, one from the Celtics, the other the Patriots, worn by a boy who loved his hometown. Dr. Henry Niels explained how Richard's body was ripped open by the blast, nearly every part of him savaged by shrapnel. An FBI photo expert showed jurors exactly where Johar Tsarnaev was standing and where they say he placed his bomb, just feet away from the Richard family and Boston University grad student Lingzi Liu. Another medical examiner detailed Liu's excruciating death, terrible injuries, and incredible blood loss as tearful jurors again looked on. The government rested its case just after noon, and the defense started right up, bringing in their own digital evidence expert. While the government has data showing the brothers' GPS was in New Hampshire at the same time BBs were purchased, the defense instead used cell phone location data to suggest Johar was on campus down at UMass Dartmouth, while Tamerlan Tsarnaev apparently took the lead in getting everything ready for the marathon bombings. Now, while it's certainly true that this jury could have this case as soon as the end of this week, it's important to remember this is only the first phase, the shorter phase of this trial. Presuming that they find Johar Tsarnaev guilty, the jurors get right back to work immediately for what's called the penalty phase, and what some would argue the more important, if not certainly the longer phase, at which jurors will ultimately decide whether or not he faces life in prison or the death penalty. Live outside federal court, Jim Armstrong, WBZ News. Paula.
Jim, thank you. And to follow the developments in the courtroom minute by minute, follow Jim on Twitter. You can find him at Jim Armstrong WBZ. One of the last, a chilling picture. The Richard family standing along Boylston Street watching the marathon. And just a few feet away from them, behind a tree, Johar Tsarnaev. Jim Armstrong is live at the courthouse for us with the latest tonight. Jim?
Paula, just an exceptionally difficult day for a lot of people serving on this jury. They finished this morning a process they began on Thursday, looking at each of the autopsy photos from the 3 people who were killed at the marathon finish line. A marathon spectator snapped this image with a cell phone, never realizing they captured Johar Tsarnaev half hidden behind a tree, just inches behind 8-year-old Martin Richard, the very spot where prosecutors say Tsarnaev left his bomb. Today, to end their case, prosecutors showed jurors this photo before the testimony of the medical examiner who performed Richard's autopsy. Several jurors wept openly as Dr. Henry Niels held up the blood-soaked, torn, and burned clothing the little boy was wearing on Marathon Monday. 2 T-shirts, one Celtics, the other Patriots, worn by a young man who clearly loved his hometown. Dr. Niels explained how Richard's body was ripped open by the bomb blast, nearly every part of him savaged by shrapnel. His pants melted beyond recognition. Jurors actually saw a few angles of this moment, an FBI photo expert testifying exactly where Tsarnaev was standing and where they say he placed his bomb, right behind the Richard family and not far from Boston University grad student Lingzi Liu. Another medical examiner detailed Liu's excruciating death, terrible injuries, and incredible blood loss as tearful jurors again looked on. The government rested its case just after noon, and the defense started right up, bringing in their own digital evidence expert. The government had claimed Tsarnaev went to the marathon in 2012 with his friend Stefan Silva, but the defense used Tsarnaev's tweets from that day to show he was actually on campus at UMass Dartmouth. However, under cross-examination, the defense's own witness admitted he could be wrong, and yes, Tsarnaev actually could have been at the marathon the year before the bombings as well. Also last week, you might remember that the prosecution presented GPS evidence that it said linked the brothers' car to the Square One Mall in Saugus at the time the two pressure cookers were purchased, and to a couple of locations up in New Hampshire when BBs were purchased at Walmarts up there. The defense honed right in on that this afternoon with its own expert witness who said that GPS may well tell one story, but they used Johar's own cell phone to say that while the GPS was in Saugus in New Hampshire, Johar apparently never left the UMass Dartmouth campus, strongly suggesting, in the eyes of the defense at least, that it was Tamerlan Tsarnaev who was making those other purchases and leading the way planning the Boston Marathon bombing. Testimony continues tomorrow morning. Live outside federal court, Jim Armstrong, WBZ News. Paula.
Jim, thanks so much. And you can follow Jim on Twitter.